The microphone screeched. Laughter followed. And of course, Richard Caldwell said, smiling into the spotlight, "We're grateful Margaret could join us tonight." A pause. As a guest. 400 people turned to look at her. Margaret Holt lifted her champagne glass and said nothing. The word guest hung in the air of the Whitmore Grand Ballroom like smoke. 47 Abels, crystal stemware. $800 a plate. Margaret Holt didn't flinch. She picked up her champagne glass, turned slightly toward the woman beside her, and said nothing. Silence is power. The Caldwell Whitmore Children's Hospital Gala was not just a fundraiser. It was the fundraiser. The one where pledges were announced publicly, where board decisions were telegraphed through seating arrangements, where a man's position in the room told you exactly how much he was worth to the institution and how much the institution thought it was worth to him. Richard Caldwell had chaired the Hospital Foundation's board for 11 years. Silver-haired, perpetually tanned. The kind of man who wore his philanthropy like a monogram on his shirt cuff. Visible just enough to be noticed. He was also Margaret's husband. Had been for 22 years. And 3 weeks ago, in the kitchen of their home in Ridgewood, over coffee she had made and a newspaper he had not read, he had looked at her and said, "The gala's going to be the biggest one yet. I need you there, beside me." Not with him. Beside him. She had noted the distinction. Now she sat at table 4, not the head table. Not beside him at the podium. In a charcoal silk dress that cost less than the centerpiece next to her. And she smiled at nothing in particular while Richard listed donors. 14 names. Their names were on the program. On the wall. Spoken into the microphone with weight and gratitude. Margaret's name was not mentioned. What Richard did not say, what no one in that room except the people knew, was that the $4.2 million anchor gift that had made this gala possible, the one that had convinced every other donor to open their checkbooks, the one that had saved the pediatric oncology wing from a March closure, had come from Margaret, specifically from a trust her mother had left her, specifically from a decision Margaret had made alone, quietly 6 months ago. She had told Richard. He had said, "That's generous, Maggie." And then he had taken the credit. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the way water reshapes, slowly, consistently, until the stone no longer remembers what it looked like before. She watched him at the podium now, working the room the way he always did. Easy smile, measured pause, the practiced humility of a man who had never once been humble. Margaret set down her champagne glass. Her hand was steady. What they didn't know, what Richard certainly didn't know, was that she had made a phone call that morning. Golden Heart Stories brings you real accounts of dignity, resilience, and the moments that change everything. Stay with us. The woman beside Margaret was Patricia Yen. She leaned in close enough to be heard without being overheard. "He didn't say your name." "No," Margaret said. "He didn't." "Margaret." Patricia's voice was careful. "Was it for .2?" A pause. "Million?" Margaret lifted her champagne again. Said nothing. Patricia sat back slowly. Processed that. Looked toward the podium where Richard was now laughing at his own anecdote about a golf trip with the hospital's chief of surgery. To tables over, Margaret could see her stepson, Bryce, Richard's son, foundation role, watching her, not with concern, with calculation. He had his father's eyes, the kind that were always measuring something: distance, usefulness, threat level. Margaret met his gaze. He looked away first. She had learned over 22 years to notice who looked away first. It told you everything about where the power actually lived, regardless of who was holding the microphone. The applause started. Richard was wrapping up his remarks, doing the thing he always did at the end. opening his arms slightly, the posture of a man receiving gratitude he believed he deserved. "This institution," he said, voice dropping to a register he reserved for sincerity, "is a monument to what generosity can build. And I am humbled, truly humbled, to have been part of building it." More applause. Margaret clapped twice. Precisely twice. Across the room, she caught the eye of a man she recognized. Late 50s Navy suit, seated at table 1. Walter Osei. Board member. Attorney. One of the 3 people in the room who had seen the actual donation documentation. Walter gave her the smallest nod. She gave nothing back. Not yet. At the break between the formal remarks and the dinner service, the room shifted into its cocktail hour posture. People standing, moving, the lower or of 100 conversations designed to be heard but not understood. Richard appeared at her side within minutes. He kissed her cheek. Smelled like the bourbon he'd had before she arrived. "You look beautiful," he said. "The automatic version." "Thank you. Good turnout." "Yes." He glanced around the room, already distracted, already searching for the next person he needed to be seen talking to. "I was going to mention you in the remarks," he said, still not looking at her. "But I didn't want to put you on the spot. You know how you get." She looked at him then. "How I get," she repeated. "In big rooms, you don't like the attention." 22 years. That was how long he had been rewriting her. Not all at once. Not cruelly enough to name. Just consistently. Just enough. "You don't like attention. You're not good with people. You're too sensitive." That's not what happened. She had started believing some of it. She had stopped approximately 9 months ago, when she had found the first set of financial documents in his home office that he hadn't meant for her to find. "Of course," she said, and she smiled. And Richard, satisfied, moved toward the man in the navy suit. He did not know that she and Walter had already spoken. He did not know what Walter had helped her put in motion. He was about to find out in approximately. She checked the slim watch on her wrist. 40 minutes. The dinner service had just begun when Bryce found her. He didn't sit. He stood just behind her chair, close enough to be intimate, far enough to be dismissive, and he said quietly, "Dad says you've been asking questions about the foundation accounts." Margaret cut into her salmon. "Has he?" "He's not upset. He just thinks he." Bryce paused. "Recalibrated. He thinks it might be worth you talking to someone. Professionally. Since the thing with your mother passing." She set her fork down. "Not loudly. Just set it down. Bryce. He worries about you. We both do. Grief does things to people's judgment. Your father," Margaret said, her voice clear and level, "has been withdrawing money from a charitable foundation account into a personal investment vehicle for 14 months. Silence. Bryce's expression didn't collapse, it froze. That's a serious issue. I have the documentation." She picked up her fork again. "Sit down or walk away, Bryce. Those are the options available to you right now." He walked away. She took a bite of salmon. Patricia, who had heard every word, stared at her. "How long have you known?" 9 months, Margaret said. "And you came here tonight?" "I'd been waiting for the right room." Walter Osei left table 1 at 8:47 p.m. He did not go to the bar. He did not go to the restroom. He walked to the small anteroom off the main ballroom where the Foundation's board members had gathered for a private pre-announcement conversation. A ritual before the pledge totals were read publicly. Margaret followed. She was not supposed to be in that room. She walked in anyway. Richard was mid-sentence when she entered. He stopped. 6 faces turned. 3 board members. The Foundation's executive director. The hospital's chief of surgery. And a woman Margaret didn't recognize who. she would later learn, was a journalist from the regional business publication that had been covering the hospital's expansion story for 4 months. Richard recovered fast. He always did. Maggie, this is a closed session, sweetheart. Sweetheart. In front of 6 people. Walter said, actually, Richard. Margaret has standing to be here. A pause that changed the temperature of the room. She's listed as the primary donor on the anchor gift. Richard's jaw tightened. She's listed as. It's a joint gift. It came from the Evelyn Marsh Trust. Walter said. Which is Margaret's sole inheritance from her mother. Which is in Margaret's name. Which Margaret directed to this foundation through independent legal counsel 6 months ago. Every eye in the room recalibrated. Margaret stood just inside the doorway. The documentation is with the board. Walter continued, as of this afternoon. Richard looked at her. Not with anger, not yet. With the specific expression of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not what he thought it was. She said nothing. She let him stand in that. One of the board members, a woman named Dr. Rhonda Tate, who had been on the foundation board for 8 years and had never once liked Richard Caldwell, looked at Margaret with an expression that might have been respect. Mrs. Holt, she said, we had no idea. No, Margaret said, you weren't meant to, not until now. Richard said, this is not the place to. You thanked 14 donors tonight. Margaret said, calm, direct, clear as water. You thanked people who gave $50,000. You thanked a corporation that gave $100,000. You told this room, she gestured back toward the ballroom, that this building, this wing, this institution, was built on generosity. She paused. And then you introduced me as a guest. The journalist in the corner had stopped pretending she wasn't listening. We'll talk about this at home, Richard said. We won't, actually. She walked back into the ballroom. He did not follow immediately. That told her something. He was recalculating, rebuilding his approach. Richard always needed a moment to reconstruct the story into one where he was reasonable and she was reactive. She returned to table 4. Patricia looked at her. Well, give it 10 minutes, Margaret said. She was right. Within 10 minutes, the room had changed in the way that rooms change when information moves faster than its source intends. She could feel it. The slight repositioning of bodies. The conversations that paused when she walked past. To foundation board members who had not spoken to her all evening now caught her eye and nodded. Bryce was on his phone in the corner, shoulders hunched. The executive director, a man named Philip Garrett who had, for 3 years, addressed Margaret as Richard's wife even after being corrected twice, crossed the room to her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. And certainly, Mrs. Holt, I want to say on behalf of the foundation. Not yet, Philip. He blinked. I'm sorry? Whatever you're about to say. Save it. She looked at him steadily. Because what happens next determines whether I want to hear it. He retreated. Richard appeared at the edge of the room. She watched him scan the space. Watched him read it. Watched his jaw tighten as he understood. Clearly, finally, that this was not a conversation that could be walked back. He moved toward her. She stood. Not to leave, to be standing when he arrived. He lowered his voice. You made your point. I made a record, she said. That's different. A record. He almost laughed. Margaret, you're turning a misunderstanding into a 14 months, Richard. He stopped. The account withdrawals, the investment vehicle, the misappropriation of restricted charitable funds. She watched his face. Walter is not the only attorney who has seen the documentation. The laugh died completely. You wouldn't. I've already. 2 words. She let them land. His face did something she had not seen in 22 years of marriage. It went blank. Not angry. Blank. She had found the edge of what he had believed she was capable of, and she had walked past it, and he had no map for the territory she was standing in. At 9:15 p.m., the pledge totals were announced. Philip Garrett stood at the podium and read through the numbers with the kind of careful precision that suggested he had been very recently made, aware that precision mattered tonight. And then he said, "The anchor gift for the pediatric oncology wing expansion, $4.2 million, was donated by Margaret Evelyn Holt through the Evelyn Marsh Trust in memory of her mother." The room went completely quiet. Then applause. Not the polite variety. The kind that builds. Margaret did not stand, did not wave, did not perform gratitude for being seen. She sat at table 4, back straight, champagne untouched, and received it. Richard was at the side of the room. She did not look at him. The journalist, she had found a seat during the transition, was writing something on her phone with the focused attention of someone who understands they are watching the story rewrite itself. Dr. Rhonda Tate from the board found Margaret as the applause wound down. "I want to be transparent with you," Rhonda said, sitting without being invited. "The board has questions about some of the foundation's financial activity. Walter brought documentation to us this afternoon. There will be an emergency session next week." "I know," Margaret said. "We may need your cooperation." "You have it." Rhonda looked at her. "How long did you plan this?" "I didn't plan it," Margaret said. "I prepared for it. Those are different things." At 9:45 p.m., Richard asked for the car. He found her near the coat check. There was no anger left in his voice. That was worse somehow than if there had been. "Come home." "I don't think so." "Margaret." He looked around, keeping it contained. "Whatever you think you've accomplished tonight." "Bryce knew about the withdrawals," she said. "He's known for at least 6 months. I have the text messages." Richard's face changed again. "The house is in my name," she continued. "The car is in my name. The joint accounts. I spoke to counsel last week. I've already moved what was mine." He stared at her. "You planned this." "I told you," she said. "I prepared." "Margaret." "You told a room of 500 people that I was a guest," she said. "In a wing that exists because of my mother's money. Because of a decision I made when I was grieving and still believed you were worth trusting." Her voice did not shake. "It didn't need to." "I want to go home," he said again, smaller this time. "Then go." She retrieved her coat. She walked out of the Whitmore Grand Ballroom through the main entrance, not the side door. Slowly. The car she had arranged was waiting. Not their car. Her car she had booked 3 days ago because she had known with the certainty of a woman who has spent 9 months preparing, that she would not be leaving with him tonight. She sat in the back seat. The driver pulled into traffic. Outside, the city moved past in its usual way, indifferent and bright, full of people who had no idea that anything had just shifted. Her phone showed 14 missed messages. Bryce, Richard. Bryce again. A number she didn't recognize. Probably the PR person Richard kept on retainer for exactly these kinds of situations. She set the phone face down. Patricia had texted once. "You okay?" Margaret typed back yes. Then she looked out the window. She wasn't broken. That was what surprised her. Sometimes, how unbroken she was. People expected grief to look a certain way. Expected a woman leaving a 22-year marriage to be visibly devastated. She had done her devastation privately. In the 9 months she'd spent going through documents, meeting with attorneys, sitting with her mother's death and the clear-eyed understanding that the trust her mother had spent a lifetime building had been about to be absorbed into a man's ego without her name ever being attached to it. She had grieved the marriage long before tonight. Tonight had been administrative. Her phone buzzed. "Walter," she answered. "The board is moving faster than I expected," he said. "Rhonda Tate is not a woman who tolerates loose ends. They'll have a special session Thursday. You'll want your attorney present. Already scheduled." A pause. "Margaret, I have to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Did you come tonight for the recognition? Or for the record?" She thought about that. The window, the city, the way the lights blurred slightly when the car moved fast enough. "My mother," she said finally, "spent 40 years writing checks that other people took credit for." She said it didn't bother her. I think she was lying to herself. Walter was quiet. "I came for the record," she said. "The recognition was just what happens when you finally make one." 3 weeks later, the regional business publication ran a story. The headline was careful, business publications always were. But the subtext was not. "Foundation Board opens investigation into financial irregularities. Former chair steps down pending review." Richard had stepped down voluntarily, which was the version of events his attorney had negotiated. Bryce had resigned from his position. He had also, Margaret learned through Walter, retained his own separate counsel, which meant he understood, finally, what his father was actually facing. The pediatric oncology wing had a new name. Not Caldwell, not Caldwell Whitmore. The Evelyn Marsh Pediatric Oncology Center. Margaret had requested it formally through the board, and Dr. Rhonda Tate had moved on it within 48 hours. She stood in front of the new signage on a Tuesday morning in November, in a coat that was not silk and shoes that were built for pavement, and she looked at her mother's name in raised metal letters on the side of a building that would treat children for the next 100 years. No cameras, no applause, no microphone. Just her. Just this. Patricia appeared beside her. They stood in silence for a moment. She would have cried, Patricia said. She would have denied crying, Margaret said, and then cried anyway. Patricia laughed. Margaret almost did. "What now, Patricia?" Margaret looked at the sign a moment longer. "Now I go home," she said. "The actual home. The one I bought last week." She turned from the building, walked toward the street. She did not look back. If you've ever been in a room where your contribution was invisible, comment below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it. Sometimes the right words find the right person at exactly the right moment. Golden Heart Stories, every week, right here.